On today's show, the first half is done. Zip, zap, zop. Forget it. It didn't even happen. Pretend it never happened, because we are looking ahead to the second half of this Padres season and what are the biggest things to look forward to, and in some cases maybe not look forward to, maybe dread. Talking about the trade deadline, the starting pitching rotation, Joe Musgrove and Fernando Tatis Jr.'s help. Who is the biggest X factor for this team in the second half? All sorts of those questions. Gonna talk about them because this is the Padres podcast where we talk about Padres stuff. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Thursday, July 18th. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter /X at Javapeno, the best handle in the game at JAVIIPENO, or at @Padres if you only want updates for the show and occasional retweets of myself. But nonetheless, you can check out both of those. You can also check out my work at the lovely website Just Baseball. I recently wrote about Michael King and then some big trade targets ahead of the deadline that I think are going to be interesting. One of them actually already happened, I believe, in Taylor Ward, but nonetheless, go check that out, and also going to be writing about a bunch of other things soon, including a Padres trade deadline guide there. You can also check out my show, Baseball versus the World. But in terms of today's episode, it is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. So check out Booking.com for your stay today. Look, today's episode, we're talking second half, baby, because that's what we got to do. We'll be back to talking about regular matchups and the pitching matchups and all that stuff when we face off against Cleveland tomorrow. Look forward to that show with Jeff Ellis of Locked On Guardians. That should be a lot of fun. Also some talk about the Padres MLB draft picks that they made this past weekend. So that'll be a lot of fun. But all in all, we're talking about my biggest things to look out for in the second half. And basically, I'd honestly probably say that most of them are probably pretty obvious. But I still want to talk about them anyway because this is a really weird team to evaluate. I don't think it was as hard to evaluate as last year. Last year, my thing was, I just didn't think the team was very good. I thought it was very clear that they were having one of those seasons from hell and they just couldn't get out of their own way. They couldn't hit with runners on base, all that sort of stuff. Tatis wasn't fully right. He was still probably working through some injury stuff. Machado didn't really show up as much as we would have liked, all that sort of stuff, right? This year, however, they are better than last year, and we talked about this yesterday. 43-47 record at the All-Star break last year. This year, 50-49. So they have played a little bit better. They've had so many ups this year that eclipse entirely last season. So as a whole, look, if the Padres don't even make the playoffs, dare I say Jurickson Profar alone makes watching this season would have made it worth it, right? If I told you that later. Still really great, but all in all, there's so much going on with this team that it's just so hard to evaluate because about a week and a half ago, this was a team that looked like, yes, they are finally breaking through. They're finally stopping with this nonsense of getting swept and going backwards. And then what happens? They have the bad series against the D-backs. They have the really bad series against the Mariners. And then they get their butts kicked by the Braves to the point where now they're once again at that dreaded one game above 500 or 500 thing. So let's talk about some of the things that I think the Padres fans and all of you guys need to pay attention to the most for the second half, just some of the biggest storylines. Number one is an obvious one, but I actually don't think it's the most important. That's not why I'm starting with it. It is Tatis's health. This is pretty much a given. The reason why I don't think it's my number one is because, first of all, we have heard that it's progressing a little bit better than maybe initially feared, that he's, starting to take some light swings and stuff like that, that I think that he can potentially come back and be impactful. The only thing that stinks is that he got hurt right when he was starting to really, I think, fully get healthy and I think really tap into his MVP potential. I mean, he was named an all-star after all. He was really, really starting to pick things up and be easily the best National League outfielder out there, right? In terms of the rest of the season, Fernando Tatis Jr. is the best outfielder in the National League that will be available, assuming he's available, right? So if you get that back, all of a sudden we're in business, right? But for me, it's not the most important just because this team offensively has been great. Now, don't get me wrong, it is huge, but to me, you have Manny Machado. He's been stepping up, finally recapturing what we've always wanted from him. By what we've always wanted, I don't want to imply he hasn't been good before. Obviously, he should have won the MVP a couple years ago. But all in all, just seeing him turn back into what we needed from him is really great. Jay Cronenworth stepping up. We've talked about Profar ad nauseum. all that stuff, this Padres offense has been pretty good. They're second in batting average, which, granted, greatly inflated by Luis Ariz, but even still, on-base percentage, they're 8th, runs scored, they're 11th, home runs, they're 10th, slugging percentage, they're 10th. They've been a very effective offense this year, and I think that while, yes, a lot of it is that they are having like a total whiplash where now they are always hitting in high leverage situations and runners on base, bottom line is it's still a big deal. They are still a really, really capable offensive team that I trust pretty implicitly. And if you want to go by other stats, by WRC Plus, they are 7th in Major League Baseball behind Philly, Minnesota, the Mets, Yankees, Orioles, and Dodgers. All really solid to really great elite teams, right? So that's where they are offensively. The problem is going to be the pitching, which is the bigger thing that I think we got to look into, right? So in terms of the other things to keep an eye on the second half, it's pitching, obviously, but I want to kind of finish up and just mention that another thing that's going to be important, because pitching is basically inextricable from the trade deadline. Like, that's kind of going to be the thing. I think one of the things we saw this first half is that the Padres' backup options, while it's good that they had backup options for once, instead of having to rely on your Jake Arrietas, your Vincent Velasquez, your Rich Hills, right? These guys that are clearly washed and you're only taking them because you just need somebody. They haven't been able to get the reinforcements that they would have liked, right? Not only in terms of some of their prospects not developing as well, but in the case of literally appearing, right? Adam Mazur has been an absolute disaster class, basically since coming up, to the point where I actually do think it's fair how bad he was to actually adjust how you felt he might perform as a major league pitcher. I'm actually wondering if he's more suited for a long inning reliever role or just a relief role in general, maybe a 1 inning guy. I'm just really concerned that his calling card was throwing strikes and not walking guys. And what did he do immediately after getting into the league? Walk a whole lot of guys. So pitching is going to be questionable, because I think that the deadline, they're going to need to trade for some players, right? Like, that's going to be the big thing, is they need to trade for some players. I don't know who's going to be out there necessarily. I don't know if there's a ton of bullpen help out there. I saw Mason Miller, who's a popular target, was rumored a while ago with some connection to the Padres, at least by articles saying that the A's were asking for Jackson Merrill, which was patently absurd, of course. But with him, he was reportedly on the Phillies flight to the All-Star game, which told me, oh, okay, so this guy's definitely going to be on the Phillies in a couple weeks. Because if you guys might forget, I believe it was Dave Roberts at the All-Star game, I'm going to say a few years ago, when they had Max Scherzer come in, and everyone's like, here we go, like he's going to the Dodgers. Might be a little bit of a preview. But regardless, that's a big thing here. Okay, so I want to talk about some other things to look forward to. When it comes to prospects call-ups, I don't really think that the second half you might see all that many. Robbie Snelling has struggled a bit in Double-A this season, and then Dylan Lesko has been a guy that, he's coming off the Tommy John surgery, obviously, from a while ago, and he's still working his way back from that, so it's understandable. But what concerns me is that his curveball, from what I've heard, is just not being perfected all that much, and then his slider, which is something that he added prior to the season starting, has not been all that effective a pitch, which tells me that there's still, we need to wait on him. And then Robbie Snelling has just kind of struggled, right? He's giving up a lot of home runs in the minors lately in Double-A, so maybe he's not going to be this guy that's actually going to be ready immediately. Regardless, though, forget Lesko. I do think it's still worth keeping an eye on whether or not Snelling gets called up. But I will say, I think that if it happens, that's probably a bad sign, because the Padres are clearly probably desperate if they're forced to call up Robbie Snelling, which is why, again, I say it's inextricable from the trade deadline, because I don't know if they're going to get to that point. I think they will get a starter of sorts. I think this is A.J. Preller. I think this is what he does. I don't know who it will be. I don't know if it'll just be a guy who can throw innings, right? Not Rich Hill, that type of throw innings, but throw quality innings, like your Yusei Kikuchis, players like that. I think that there are enough starting pitchers out there that could fit that bill and not necessarily cost as much of a prospect overall, which is the next thing that we got to talk about to look out for the second half. The prospect haul that might be sent away. We'll talk about that in just a second, guys. But first, because here's the thing, guys, it's, this podcast by now, we have so many lovely, lovely sponsors. And one of them is the great, the legendary, the phenomenally stupendous folks over at eBay, and specifically eBay Motors, folks. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, tires, Probably, right? You need a new tire every now and then. Some new carpet, it gets messy back there in some cars. We've all been in them before, right? We've all had some messy cars before. Well, they have all that and much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed, to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber. You are certainly not burning cash. So go check that out, guys, with all the parts you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Keep it alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Go check that out. And then also, another one. This has nothing to do with cars. Well, it actually does a little bit, because you might need a vehicle in order to get to the game, and that is our folks and our lovely folks and our lovely folks. I'm going to say it again over and over, because for some reason that's been my go-to descriptor lately, lovely folks. Anyway, Game Time is fantastic, guys. We've been talking about them for a while. One of my favorite apps. They are an official authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, and they make getting tickets faster and easier. Plus, prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. So if you're one of those people who, you're checking your phone after work, it was a long day, and you're like, man, I just want to go to a game, but I don't want to pay as much. Well, guess what? The closer it is to it, maybe if you decide in the moment, maybe you're one of those spontaneous sports goers, they are really great as a marketplace to go check it out. They have deals all the time. They're also going to credit you your difference if you find better seats. It's really great. It's really, really fantastic. And you can also see little views from your seats if you want. They offer that if you're a visual person. So they've got that as well. Flash deals, zone deals, all sorts of things all the time. It's just a great marketplace if you want to catch a game, because there's games every day and you never know when you're going to be free. So shouts to Game Time. Go check them out. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. That's right, $20 just for listening to me. Just for listening to this bozo. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed with Game Time. And just like that, folks, we are thriving and vibing back onto this Locked On Padres podcast. Remember, again, go follow me at Javiipeno, JAVIIPENO on Twitter/X, and send me any of your questions for the second half. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as well for what you think are some of the biggest things to keep an eye on. I said it before the break. To me, even more than Tatis's health, and even more than specifically who the Padres trade for at the deadline, the thing I want to keep an eye out for is who the Padres trade. Because I think they're going to trade somebody. And I would probably wager they're going to give up some of the bigger prospects. And that's my thing. What kind of haul will the Padres give up? That's what I think is the biggest question. Now, to me, I think that there are some lower tier options that you could give up that would still hurt. Your Valenzuela's, the other catcher in the Padres system. I think he's ranked actually fairly high by Fangraphs, if I'm not mistaken. Is he 13th? No. Hold on, let me see. Fangraphs has him as the 6th overall prospect for the Padres right now. And he's 23 years old. The only thing that I think could be interesting here is just with an injury, right? Let's say if either Campuzano or Kyle Higashioka were to get injured, knock on wood, of course, don't want that to happen. Is it possible that you could see Valenzuela? I don't think so. I don't. Now, the Padres tend to be very aggressive, right? They do tend to be an aggressive team when it comes to promoting guys, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think he's more of a next offseason guy, but I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, I'm bringing up Valenzuela to say he might be one of those pretty okay pieces that they send and as well as another prospect, maybe another reliever or so, some extra little fluff to get a decent starting pitcher. And I wouldn't mind that because you're keeping Ethan Salas. That's the thing. The Padres have 2 prospects in this system, not just 2. They're not the only 2 good ones, but they have 2 prospects that are super duper young. And I'm talking about this because I think those are the guys that they need to keep. But considering that there's 2 of them, Ethan Salas, who's 18 years old, and Leotis DeVries, who's 17 years old, over at shortstop, by the way. That's right. Over at shortstop. What is one thing that the Padres have always had, right? They have so many shortstops. And I think that in general, that's why I would be a little bit cautious, right? And that's why I'm a little bit worried. If you get rid of DeVries, who's super young and already looking really, really good, and I think could be a high value player in the future, it remains to be seen if Preller, who has his job on the line, might be like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to trade DeVries, I'm going to trade Salas, and I'm going to get my, Luis Roberts, I'm going to get my Crochets. Hey, Tariq Skubal, all of a sudden, I've heard more chat about for the deadline. Unfortunately, I heard it in regards to the Dodgers, but that means he's probably on the market. The Tigers with Jack Flaherty and Skubal, those are the type of players that I wouldn't be surprised if Preller goes all in trying to acquire. The latter, not as much because he's only on a 1-year deal in Flaherty. But I don't know. I think that this team, the strategy is going to be, for me, I think a big part of this is the fact that I have not heard that many positive things on Snelling or Lesko in terms of how they can help now, which is why I think Preller will say, why am I going to care about some 18, 17-year-old kids when we have pitching needs right now and our prospects that are pitchers aren't necessarily developing at a pace that suggests they are going to be brought up and be valuable right now or even possibly next year, right? We don't exactly know what's going to happen. These things can flip, make no mistake. We talk about how Mackenzie Gore went from being number one prospect to being outside the top 100 for some people. The other opposite can happen. Robbie Snell can have a great end to the season and be all of a sudden be a top level prospect that is in the Padres rotation opening day next year. That's possible. But for me, that's why I'm expecting some big time trades here. And I want to see how can you keep the kill count of this farm system low, I think is going to be the question. But I think a Mazer could be on the move. I think a Francisco Pena can be on the move, and I think Olesko or Snelling can be on the move. The only one that wouldn't be on the move, frankly, that's obvious, is Jackson Merrill, right? Because he's already up and he's been amazing. So it wouldn't shock me if he's the only one that stays, right? And maybe even Ethan Salas, because there have been reports from Dennis Lin in The Athletic that's like he might require like some special authority to do that, which if that's true, good. That's how it should be. If someone's in the hot seat, be like, okay, you're going to do some crazy things, but don't touch these guys. This is break class, right? This is behind reinforced carbonite, vibranium steel. We won't let you trade these guys. But regardless, for all those reasons, the prospect trade haul is going to be interesting. And I'm hoping that it can be kept to a minimum. That way, for next year, we have some things to figure out, right? So that's going to be interesting. But yeah, to me, Valenzuela, Mazer, those are the type of guys that trading them, I wouldn't feel all that bad about. And if you had to trade for one of those big prospects, keep one of Snelling or Lesko. That would be my thing. I'd prefer to keep both, but keep at least one is going to be a big thing to look out for. But in terms of other things, speaking of pitching, bullpen turnover is going to be a big thing in the second half. On top of the fact that we're already seeing so many new guys enter this bullpen lately, from who is it that they brought up? From Sean Reynolds to, Logan Gillespie to Austin Davis. They still have some prospects like Alec Jacob. I know that the Stephen Kolek thing has been annoying. I will say that he generates a lot of ground balls from what I've been seeing. And that gets me a little bit excited, which means that maybe it's possible he can be a little bit of an unexpected, riser in the second half. I wouldn't be surprised in that. But all in all, you're still going to get a crazy overhaul, I think, of the bullpen. I think Enyel de Santos will be gone soon. And frankly, this is something that you guys don't even have to look for at the deadline. I'm expecting this soon because Dennis Lin and The Athletic wrote about it too. He was like, this is probably something they have to address now. I think that starting pitching, that is another thing. That it all depends on how Darvish and Musgrove are doing. And we don't really know that right now. So for me, though, bullpen is like, no, we don't know if they have anybody coming up. And frankly, Wandy Peralta being on the IL, Tom Cosgrove being on the IL and being bad, we just don't know exactly what to expect out of literally anyone in this bullpen. Every time you start to believe in Yuki Matsui, he falls apart and has a really bad, stretch of innings. So this team needs an overhaul. That's a thing to look out for. What are they going to do at the deadline? I think they need to do something big. Or maybe what happens is this is why the health stuff matters. Or if they do something at the trade deadline. Because then they could put someone like Randy Vasquez in the bullpen, and maybe because I still like his stuff. I do. I know he's getting hammered. I get it. But I still think there's potential there. Maybe that's what happens. Maybe you move a guy from the rotation to the bullpen. but they need to acquire a starter to do that. But overall, I expect a big overhaul of the bullpen. That's going to be a big deal. Another thing, and this has nothing to do with the bullpen or whatnot, but I mentioned catchers. I'm curious to see what the split time will be with Luis Campusano and Kyle Higashioka in the second half. The reason I'm saying that is because while, yes, it should be 70-30, 80-20, dare I say, of a timeshare between Campusano and Higgy, which I know. As one of the founding members of the Campusano Hive, I understand that might surprise people, but his regression offensively and the fact that he just never walks, not hitting the ball hard, and that he didn't improve even a modicum of an ounce better defensively, Higashioka literally has provided more value in half the games of Campusano, which is why I'm kind of like, I don't know how this guy's going to do. Maybe he needs a swing overhaul in the offseason, but I just don't see it happening. But the other problem with this is, are we sure Higashioka is going to keep it up? I mentioned this yesterday. He's already surpassed his total in career home runs. He's slugging like 800,000 is what it feels like lately. How much of that is sustainable? He is someone that I love as a backup catcher, not necessarily a starter. So catching is going to be weird. And like I said, with a Valenzuela, is it possible that they maybe call him up and say, oh, we need this, let's bring him in? It wouldn't shock me. I don't think it'll happen this year. I really don't. I'm just wondering, though, what's the timeshare going to look like between those two? It's a little bit of a thing to keep an eye on in the second half for me. But there are some other things, folks, to keep an eye on, obviously, in the second half. Plenty to keep an eye on, including the Padres' biggest X factor. So, who is it? Who's Javi's biggest X factor? We're going to talk about it in just 1 second. But first, folks, we got to take a second to talk to you about the sponsor at the top of the show. We love them because it is almost August, by the way. August, I feel like, is a month known for vacations. Middle of July is known for vacations too, but August especially. And you know who can help you out with that? Today's sponsor of Locked On Padres, Booking.com, Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, because that's what people like to do. You got to visit every stadium. It's time to explore those U.S. cities that you swear you'd never go. I don't want to go to no Chavez Ravine in L.A. I'm a Pirates fan. I don't want to go to Wrigley Field in Chicago. Well, whatever it is, you're still going to want some help, and Booking.com is here to help you out with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay wherever you are traveling to. From hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts, they've got you with so many choices across the U.S., for your summer travels, for baseball, or for whatever it is this season. Maybe you're traveling to see Taylor Swift. Maybe you're traveling to see your favorite podcast performed live. May not be a reference to myself there. But whatever it is, Booking.com, they have you covered. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, including your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, on the site, or in the Booking.com app. Booking.com, Booking.yeah. Just gets me every time I say that. Speaking of gets me every time, though. You know what gets me every time? Them deals, them promotions. You know who has a lot of them? The good folks over at Prize Picks, guys. It is the #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's essential. It's essential for all you gambling folks out there and daily fantasy enjoyers. It's the most exciting way to play. You just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll on in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and join the Prize Picks community, and they have all sorts of promotions going constantly. For example, lately on Tuesdays, select player stat projections will be lowered to help your lineup hit, or on Fridays, you can get your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup. And that's just an example. They've got things going all along. And by the way, it's not just baseball. They're going to have football coming up soon. They're going to have they have currently WNBA stuff from Angel Reese to Caitlin Clark to Asia Wilson to Brianna Stewart, all that sort of stuff. They've got you covered. It's available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia, just as a couple of examples. We love y'all. We love y'all, California, because you're where the Padres are. We love you. Except LA. We don't like y'all. But still, that's where it's legalized. And go check out the app there. And also go check out this nice spanking deal for you. Download the Prize Picks app and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast, as always, thriving and vibing into the final segment of this episode. All right, some last things that I want to, just throw out there for things to look forward to in the second half, or maybe even not look forward to. One question I have is this, and this is going to be really mean. How much of what Matt Waldron is doing is sustainable? You've seen him have some more questionable starts as of late. Not bad starts, let me be very clear. He hasn't been bad. But I am wondering, how sustainable is this for Matt Waldron? Because in general, just throughout baseball history, the knuckleball isn't exactly a pitch that I look at as being something that is, it's been an endangered species for a while. You look at his past few starts. He went 7 innings against the Braves, gave up 4 earned runs on 6 hits, 1 walk, 1 strikeout, wasn't great. Previous start against Arizona, 6 innings, 3 earned runs, 2 walks, 6 Ks. Start before that at Boston, 4 1/3, gave up 3 earned runs, 4 runs, but 3 earned on 1 walk and 3 Ks. I'm just wondering how much of this he can keep up. Now, here's the thing. If he doesn't keep up this, he's kind of been like the closest thing to a quality start machine that the Padres have had this year, and Michael King too, but Michael King was a little bit more recent. I think that if Matt Waldron does regress, it's okay as long as the Padres have some other options. But because there's so much uncertainty there's a chance that you really need Matt Waldron to be great in the second half, and I don't know if he's going to do that exactly. We've seen starts where people just really lay into that knuckleball. It doesn't have the same carry. It doesn't have the same movement. If it doesn't have the movement, then that thing's getting taken into, Australia, right? Like, that's where that thing's going to get hit. For me, I'm still optimistic, though, because I feel like his secondary pitch is mainly his sweeper. We've talked about this before. The velocity, I think that thing has improved. But just being a knuckleball pitcher, and maybe this is just Padres fan PTSD, it just feels almost too good to be true that we're going to have a great quality pitcher that we basically procured out of nothing. Right? That's my issue. When have the Padres been able to do this? I understand Ruben Niebla is great, but in general, they haven't always been so good at that, right? Yes, he's improved players before. We've seen that Dylan Cease, his walk rate is lower. We've seen that Michael King got better as the season went along. Blake Snell won a Cy Young here, right? You've seen guys become really good here. I really love what Ruben Niebla's done, but still, there are some questions there, and I don't know how much of it is sustainable. Now, I will say, his peripheral sort of numbers are still not that bad, right? 3.71 ERA this year, an expected ERA of 3.79, and a FIP of 3.87. His xFIP is a little high, but sometimes I think xFIP is a little bit weird. I think sometimes xFIP can be more of a next year thing. Does that make sense? And it just might not happen. But I do like that this hasn't been a guy who's just been getting obscenely lucky. Although I will say 8.6% home run fly ball rate. It's just a tad low, but I get it too. You know what I mean? He's still been able to generate a decent amount of swing and miss when he needs to, and just not giving up all that much hard contact. I think that's the best thing about him. But in general, that is a question for me. Because without Matt Waldron, who, by the way, has never thrown this many innings before, you know what I mean? I'm not saying he can't, but that's a question. How long is this going to last? Is he going to fall off? Because if he falls off, and the Padres don't have pitching reinforcements, we're looking at a team that is Michael King and Dylan Cease, the latter of which has had moments where you're like, he's either amazing or he's garbage, right? Like really Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He kind of took what Michael King did beginning of the season, right? Jekyll and Mr. Hyde approach. That's what kind of has happened with him. So that's going to be a big question for me, and certainly something to look onto. And just again, it's hard for me to 100% believe it. This might be being pessimistic, but it's true. Another thing really quickly, I'm curious to see if other teams sell. This isn't fully just the Padres, but it does have to do with them. The Mets are currently the 3rd wildcard spot, and the Cardinals are the 2nd wildcard spot. I don't think the Cardinals really have anything to sell, so I'd take them out as being a team that could possibly sell. But the Mets, that's a team that, they're 49-46. I was wrong. I thought that they were going to regress a bit, but they've been playing really good ball lately. I don't think they're going to be as big buyers, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen with them, but keep an eye on them over this next week, because if they have a bad winning streak, if they go full Padres on everybody, Pete Alonso could be on the market. That's a big time kind of impact player. Maybe a couple of their relievers could be on the market. That's going to be interesting, but more so, less about what they have to offer in trades and more about, cool, that's one less team to deal with. The other one is Arizona. Arizona has been a little bit like the Padres of last year, right? Where they just don't come up in the big situations and drive runs in. But even still, their overall numbers, not bad. 6 in batting average, on base percentage, they're 5th. They're 2nd in runs scored, 16th in home runs, unfortunately, but they are able to be just havoc on the base paths. That's a team with Corbin Carroll being so bad that maybe he improves in the second half. We'll have to see. But I think a bigger reason why they might sell is also because they're one of their best players, not Ketel Marte, but Christian Walker. He's a free agent after this season. So is that the type of team that wants to go all in, especially because they haven't gotten a lot out of their starting pitching? They're 26th in ERA, 29th in batting average against, 25th in whip. I don't know if that's a team that's like, we have a vibe that we can go for it. Now, granted, it's not their fault, right? Part of this is because they've had so many injuries to their rotation. That's the problem, right? You haven't had Jordan Montgomery, you did not have Merrill Kelly, and you have not had Eduardo Rodriguez. So that to me just smells of, you know what? No big deal. We just kind of had the ultimate unluckiness when it comes to our rotation. You know what I'm saying? Like, you literally lost Merrill Kelly for the year, and Montgomery and Eduardo Rodriguez, your big free agent signings, have not been there. So to me, I could see this as a team, even if they are technically above 500, or what are they right now? They're one game above 500, just like the Padres. I get that, but I see them selling, which then leaves Cardinals. It leaves the Cardinals, it leaves the Braves, and it leaves the Pirates, the Giants. Those aren't that as intimidating teams as the rest of them, right? Like, you're a lot more scared of some other teams than you are of them, right? You feel like you can beat a Pittsburgh and San Francisco, especially since San Francisco is still behind the 8 ball at 47-50 right now. So I would keep an eye out on the Mets and especially the Diamondbacks, whether or not they sell, because if they do sell, that probably takes them, or at least makes it a little bit easier to take them out of the wild card race, which makes the Padres' chance of making the playoffs better. So that's the thing for all you guys to look out for. But last but not least, my biggest X factor, haven't talked about him on this episode at all, feel like I haven't talked about him at all in general, it's Xander Bogaerts for me. Xander Bogaerts is one of the biggest X factors for this team. Now, don't get me wrong, the overall X factor is probably the health of Musgrove and then the how long it's going to be before Yu Darvish comes back. He's on the restricted list dealing with family matter. I'm not trying to make light of that whatsoever, but those are the actual biggest X factors. But aside from like returning from injury, since that's easy, it's Xander Bogaerts. This guy has been dreadful this year. Obviously, we all know that. He's been one of the biggest busts that the Padres have signed or traded for in general since I've been covering this podcast, and it's up there for one of the worst moves Preller has ever made. Now, here's the thing. It's still early in the contract, but even still, that's what we're looking at here, right? Like, that's how bad he's been. This is a dude who has a WRC plus of like 80, right? Like, he has just not been able to hit this year. But the things that are playing in his favor is before he went to the IL, he was hitting the ball actually a lot harder. There was a nice little spike in his hard hit rate. And then also, you can look at the fact that he got a new bat, right? His bat actually has a little bit more of a knob, which they say is actually, it's easier on the wrist, and which is a big thing for Bogaerts. And then lastly, hey, look, Manny Machado looked dead, right? Like, Machado looked dead this year. And what happened? He bounced back and he started playing a whole lot better. And now we're like, cool, Machado looks like he's back. It's not inconceivable that Xander Bogaerts can bounce back and at least be an above average offensive player who plays solid defense. And if this team is to make a playoff run, I think he needs to be one of those leaders in the clubhouse, one of those guys who's been there before, has won 2 World Series rings before. I think that would be big for this team. I don't know what he's going to do. The only thing that's good about him is he's occasionally good at drawing a walk. Occasionally when he's in the mood, you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't swing at like awful pitches, but even still, we're going to have to see. His weighted on base is a little bit higher expected wise at 311, but that's not saying much since he's at 264 right now. His BABIP is 270, which suggests that it should get better. His lifetime career BABIP is 332, so that suggests that he's going to get a little bit better. But the decrease in hard hit rate, all that stuff, he's an X factor. You just have to see how much you get out of him. Or it's a lost season and potentially a lost contract that is going to kill this team's hype for years to come. So he's a big X factor. Forget even just like helping this team be great. Forget being a star, what you paid for. What I need to hope for and what you need to look for is just hoping that Xander Bogaerts can show that he's not a minor league player. That's where we're at right now. You know, we're in like Hosmer territory. That's how bad Xander Bogaerts has been this year. So that's my biggest thing. He's an X factor. If he's good, then all of a sudden you get Profar doing what he's doing, which I think is going to continue for at least the rest of this year. Profar just seems like he's having the magic season of legends. I don't care if his expected stats say he's going to get worse. I think he's going to be fine. You've got Cronenworth, you've got Machado, you've got Merrill, you've got Solano, you've got Arise, hopefully. You've got all these players balling out. If you can add Bogarts to that, that is going to be huge. And it especially is going to be huge for the defense, by the way, because Bogarts is a much better second baseman than Luis Arraez is. So keep Luis Arraez off the field. That would be great. So we'll see. We'll see, guys. But that's just my, initial primer for what to look forward to and what to pay attention to heading into the second half of San Diego Padres baseball. It's going to be fun, guys. And at least until the deadline, it's going to be fun. Even if you're super pessimistic about this team, let's all be real here. You can't wait to see what this madman in AJ Preller, the most entertaining, funniest GM I've ever seen in my life, for a bunch of different reasons, both ironically and unironically, the funniest GM ever. Love that guy. Love that guy very much. Look at the content he's given us. But with that all being said, everybody, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter/X, the best handle in the game, at Javipeno, JAVIIPENO. Remember to start sending me your questions and comments on my Twitter, on the YouTube channel for Monday's mailbag. And then look forward to tomorrow's podcast with Jeff Ellis of Locked On Guardians, previewing the series and talking a little bit about the Padres draft class from this past weekend. So until next time, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful, my Friar Faithful homies. Take care.